The financial independence retire early movement is engineered around a single specific objective: accumulating enough capital to completely sever the link between your time and mandatory labor decades before traditional retirement age. This equation maps the deterministic arithmetic governing that escape. It calculates the exact number of working years required to fund 1 year of living expenses, based entirely on your savings rate. If you save 50% of your income, the output is exactly 1-to-1. 1 year of work buys exactly 1 year of freedom. Push that savings rate to 75%, and the timeline collapses. You now only need to work for 4 months to secure a full year of living expenses. The mathematical endgame is to accumulate a portfolio equal to 25 times your annual expenses. At that threshold, the 4% safe withdrawal rule triggers, meaning investment returns can theoretically sustain your lifestyle indefinitely. But these projections rely on a perfectly rational actor making highly optimized decisions over decades. The equations show us how the math works, but they fail to explain the reality of exactly who manages to execute this level of financial discipline. Traditional macroeconomic models assume that extreme wealth accumulation is a natural byproduct of general schooling. The expectation is that higher human capital yields a higher net worth. In reality, highly educated professionals routinely failed to execute the basic arithmetic required for early retirement. A university degree does not reliably translate to an optimized savings rate. The discrepancy exists because standard economic models suffer from severe attenuation bias. Attenuation bias is a statistical error where inaccurate measurements in a survey cause the mathematical relationship between two variables to appear much weaker than it actually is. Economists traditionally use ordinary least squares, or OLS regressions, a standard method of estimating relationships by drawing a straight line through data points, which are highly vulnerable to this exact bias. A working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research analyzed the massive Chilean social protection survey, providing an empirical reality check on exactly how these standard models fail. This scatterplot illustrates the flawed baseline expectation of the OLS model. It shows a gentle positive correlation where years of general schooling slightly increase total net wealth. When researchers correct the data to isolate specific financial literacy, the reality emerges. The slope of wealth accumulation completely decouples from general schooling and spikes sharply upward. Specific mastery of financial concepts is the true causal engine at extreme wealth accumulation. General education is largely a statistical decoy. This formula represents the standard economic approach to modeling an individual's net worth, factoring in financial literacy, schooling, and personal characteristics. The problem lies in these two specific variables: unobserved individual characteristics and the random error term. These hidden variables create endogeneity, specifically omitted variable bias. Omitted variable bias happens when a statistical model leaves out an important underlying factor that influences both the input and the final outcome, skewing the results entirely. Consider a psychological trait like innate caution. A deeply cautious person interacts with risk very differently than an average actor. That innate caution might drive someone to heavily study personal finance, artificially inflating their literacy score. But that same caution makes them terrified of equity markets, leading them to hold cash and severely stunt their wealth accumulation. A standard OLS regression looks at this cautious individual and concludes that high financial literacy results in low net worth. The model is blind to the psychological quirk, so it mathematically suppresses the true value of financial literacy across the board. Furthermore, standard surveys introduce massive random measurement error. They grade financial knowledge with basic percentage correct tests, treating all questions as equally valuable. Until econometricians can separate true financial competence from random personality quirks and poorly weighted tests, the actual power of financial literacy remains entirely hidden in the data. To eliminate the measurement error, the NBER researchers applied the Priddit weighting mechanism. Priddit is an advanced scoring system that assigns heavier mathematical weight to difficult questions and severely penalizes incorrect answers on widely known facts. Standard tests are flawed because they give a respondent the exact same 1-point reward for knowing the legal retirement age as they do for calculating complex compound interest over multiple years. In the Chilean dataset, 79% of the population correctly answered question 8 regarding the legal retirement age for women. Only 2% correctly calculated question 4, which required determining a 10% compound interest yield over 2 years. PRIDIT fixes this discrepancy. Missing the difficult compound interest question yields a minor penalty. Failing the widely known retirement age triggers a massive negative score. Correctly calculating compound interest generates an exponential positive multiplier, as this knowledge is exceptionally rare. Using principal components analysis, this scoring method generates a highly precise latent financial literacy score. It isolates the specific ability to process economic information, entirely decoupled from how many years someone sat in a classroom. By forcing the math to respect the actual difficulty of the concepts, researchers build a statistical scalpel sharp enough to isolate true financial intelligence. With measurement error solved, the researchers tackled omitted variable bias using instrumental variables. An instrumental variable is a statistical tool used to isolate a true cause and effect relationship by finding an outside factor that influences the input but has no direct connection to the final outcome. The researchers used 2 specific exogenous shocks as their instruments: exposure to a 1981 National School Voucher Program and the macroeconomic unemployment rate in Santiago when the respondent was exactly 16 years old. These instruments work because they heavily influence a person's educational path and labor market entry, but they are completely immune to an individual's personal psychology or innate caution. Comparing the flawed OLS model against the corrected IV model reveals a massive shift. Removing statistical noise collapses the general schooling metric from positive 6.35 to negative 5.25. Simultaneously, the isolated financial literacy coefficient explodes, skyrocketing from 1.23 to 8.93. In real terms, a mere 0.2 standard deviation increase in this isolated literacy score yields an average $13,800 increase in net wealth. That wealth jump is highly targeted. It shows up specifically in optimized pension wealth and a higher density of system contributions. When stripped of statistical illusions, general education is proven practically irrelevant to wealth building. Highly specific financial literacy is the undisputed causal driver. High financial literacy is not abstract knowledge. It mechanically forces the savings rate upward through optimal, aggressive participation in tax-advantaged systems. Looking back at the FIRE equation, we see exactly how the data applies to early retirement. The data proves literate individuals contribute to pensions more densely, mathematically driving the savings input upward and forcing the required working years down. Retiring early also requires advanced mechanics to access capital before the legal withdrawal age of 59.5. This requires executing strategies like the Roth IRA conversion ladder, which systematically shifts pre-tax funds into accessible accounts over a 5-year waiting period. Alternatively, it requires utilizing Rule 72T. Substantially Equal Periodic Payments, or SEP, is a strict IRS provision allowing penalty-free withdrawals from retirement account calculated identical distribution every year for at least 5 years. The ultimate lever to artificially accelerate the portfolio target is geographic arbitrage. This tactic exploits currency valuations to drastically lower the absolute dollar amount required to satisfy the 4% safe withdrawal rule. During the accumulation phase, the practitioner earns a high salary in a strong currency while aggressively minimizing housing and food costs. In the retirement phase, they relocate entirely to a low-cost zone, instantly hitting the 25 times multiple on a much smaller portfolio. Executing these maneuvers requires highly specific, actionable knowledge regarding tax code exceptions, inflation modeling, and geopolitical visa requirements. A standard university degree simply does not provide this curriculum. The educated but financially illiterate worker often remains trapped in a high-stress, high-income accumulation phase, bleeding capital to extreme economic precision. It is the result of drastically reducing the required capital mass while maximizing the efficiency of every dollar saved. Extreme financial independence is never an accidental byproduct of simply being well-educated. It is the direct, mathematically proven result of being deeply financially literate.